So at what point in your life did you know that you wanted to get into radio, and why was that?
Well, I was one of those guys that traditionally, when I was a kid, I listened to AM radio, in my bedroom at night, trying to pick up stations as far away as I could. And I listened to stations in Boston and New Orleans, St. Louis, Denver, just trying to pick things up, AM stations in Chicago, and was just enamored with talk radio and being on the radio. Never really wanted to do anything else. And then we had a local broadcaster, his name was Terry Stake on WFHR in Wisconsin Rapids, that I was kind of my mentor. He let me come in once I got into high school. I did a halftime interview of a high school game and said, hey, I want to do what you do someday. So he let me come in on Saturday mornings and watch what he did with sports in the morning. And really, that's all I ever wanted to do in my whole life. There was never anything else, besides, like playing, maybe center field for the Milwaukee Brewers when you're real young. But, went to college at UW Oshkosh, and then, got going at KFIZ. So it's radio's been in my blood since probably I was 5 or 6 years old.
And then how did you end up at the Fizz? You mentioned you were a college student at UW Oshkosh at the time. So how did that job opportunity come about, and what were your duties initially?
Interesting story on that. So I'm laying on the couch watching the Halloween episode of Chips in probably, I would say, late October of 1994. And Doug Russell, who was working at KFIZ at the time, was also a station manager at WRST in the campus radio station in Oshkosh. So I'm laying on the couch, and this guy calls my dorm room. He says, hey, this is Dan Kyle from KFIZ in Fax 107 in Fond du Lac. I'm like, hey, who? From where? And he said, yeah, we run this all news station on an FM. It's pretty, unique and innovative concept. He goes, but we need somebody to cover UW Oshkosh for us. And Doug Russell said that you are on campus and work in the sports department at the college station, and can you do that? So I did that. I just took my recorder and talked to Ted Van Dellen, the men's basketball coach, a couple of times, and then I got called to a meeting maybe 2-3 weeks later after this happened, and there were a bunch of changes at the radio station, so people got let go, and Greg Owens says to me, yeah, we need some people to board op games. Can you board op some games? And he's like, oh, that means you just play commercials during, the broadcast. And so I did that. I started out as a board op, and I still remember the first game I ever board op was a Badger hockey game, probably mid-December of 1994. It was the guy. Well, this is a different time, remember. I don't even remember what his name was, but we were on the old Scott Street location. And I walk in there, number one, he's smoking a cigarette. And he says, don't tell anybody I'm smoking a cigarette. And he goes, that's number one. I'm like, okay. And if there's these format sheets you have to go, there's a network break that you just let it go, which is like a network commercial for somebody that would be for a national company. And then there's a local avail. So whenever it's time for the local commercial, you would play that. Well, he goes, don't bother with that. He goes, just play a commercial whenever they play a commercial. And this is my first experience by myself with this guy at KFIZ. So I'm like, oh, and I was kind of oh, interesting, and then I kind of figured out later that how it really was supposed to work, because I kind of figured it out. So started out doing that, board opped a few games, and then Jay Rudolph was the farm guy and also broadcast games. And in mid-January, he calls me up out of the blue and says, hey, everybody's sick here. We have a high school game tonight. It's Laconia at Campbellsport. Can you do it? I was told by Doug that you could broadcast games. I'm like, sure, where's Campbellsport? Well, that was pre-apps and stuff to figure it out. And so I went and broadcast the game, didn't know what the heck I was doing. And from there, all of a sudden, I'm board opping, and whenever they needed a game, they let me call a game, started to fill in for the nighttime guy, just doing basic remedial work to get the station ready for the next day. And then from there, it kind of snowballed into a bunch of different things. Who would have thought?
Yeah, what crazy beginnings for you. And of course, it all turned out really well. And you just got more and more involved in sports, eventually started attending the games, right? Packers, Brewers, Badgers, Bucks. How do you remember how that all came about, and just what at such a young age? I mean, most of the other sports guys there, right, are long tenured people, and here you are, just this young kid in the press box in the locker room at these college and pro events.
Yeah, I started. I got my first press credential. I think it would have been in the summer of 1995. 1995, which, I graduated from high school in 1993. So my initial time I walked in the door at KFIZ was in 1994. So I would have been 20 years old at the time. I had a year in college, and the first thing I ever covered was training camp. There's a guy named Tom Nisus who was a longtime coach, in the state of Wisconsin for basketball, and he started this summer show called the Wisconsin Sports Classroom. And so then we got a credential to Packers training camp, and there were other people that kind of covered Packer games and such. And before that, I started doing a little more busy work. But when it comes to the sports, and so I remember going to training camp and interviewing Antonio Freeman for the first time. And that was one of the first guys that I ever interviewed one-on-one in training camp when he was just a young player. But so I did that, covered a few games here and there. And then when Chuck Freeman got hired, who I believe you talked to in this series, he kind of got us covering the Packers full time. Next thing you know, I'm looking for stuff to do, going up there every Monday and Wednesday, and then game days when Chuck wasn't covering. In college, I got 3 credits for covering the Milwaukee Bucks. I got a 3-credit intern. Those are bad teams, so I think I probably should have gotten six credits. In those eras, in the 1 year, the Vin Baker and Elliott Sox Perry and that group. So I started covering. I went to every Bucks game pretty much for a year. Started doing the same thing for Brewers and filled in for sports when somebody needed to be in sports. And again, just the sports aspect of it was I slowly weaseled my way in. And then 1996, maybe, I think, or 97, after Chuck got hired, he did 1 year with a couple of other guys, Fondy Sports. And then I believe 97, I started working full time doing play-by-play with Chuck and color with Chuck for high school sports broadcasts. And I was there and did that with Chuck until he went somewhere else, and until the summer of 2016, I broadcast sports. There's a lot more stuff I did, though, obviously, besides just sports, but that was a big part of why I loved being at KFIZ.
You talked about the high school games, and gosh, I mean, I'm sure hundreds, if not thousands, of games that you were a part of. Any memorable moments, memorable teams, memorable games from your time being either in the press box or courtside with the headset on, color, or as play-by-play guy?
Oh, there was a lot of them. It's kind of funny because my last day on the air at KFIZ was July 21st, 2016. So I had a lot of stuff pop up on the social medias and such for memories. And I figured I did over 1,500 games. I broadcast over 1,500 games over that time frame at KFIZ, whether it be, I did football, basketball, baseball to start. And then we mixed in 2007, I started doing hockey. But, there are just so many memorable games that you can think about. You can think about, 2000, Neil Fisher's no-hitter after the kid barely pitched all season long after Timmy Lloyd and Travis Diener basically carried the load for Marty Paulson. Because I don't think it was allowed, if you're on a Marty pitching staff, he's only allowed to throw 1 or 2 pitchers all year, I think. And then Neil Fisher threw that no-hitter in the state championship game. I mean, we'll always remember that. We'll remember one of the Grafton boys scoring 5 touchdowns in a WISA state championship game in the late 1990s, just like Al Bundy, from Married with Children. Obviously, Fond du Lac basketball was a huge part of the early days when I was young. Me and Chuck Freeman, I think, had as good of a team as there ever was in the state of Wisconsin. Chuck did the play-by-play, I did the color, and we had a great time. And those are good teams that Dick Diener coached. And he had, Travis Diener was in the NBA, Drake Diener, who had a big run overseas, and then he had a bunch of other guys that were just, not just guys, but guys that knew how to play basketball. And sometimes you still compare teams today to those like how the Fond du Lac kids played, where everybody knew their role. They were in the YMCA every night when they didn't have practice, or every weekend working hard. And just those kind of things are the things you remember. And then the later years, Fond du Lac football kind of, Mike Dressler had his team with a couple of great runs to the state quarterfinals and such. But and Coach Ganavok and Coach Jorgensen came in and their staff, and the games that they've had, the battles with Kimberly, and it kind of stinks because they had the second best team in the state probably 3 or 4 times, and unfortunately Kimberly was on their side of the bracket or in their quad, and they just couldn't get by them. So just so many different memories, so many different kids, and you see kids now, you're friends with them. You're at the press box in Fond du Lac and you see an old Fondy basketball player, and it brings back good memories and good smiles.
Something that was an offshoot of On Air, and I don't know how many people knew that you were the artiste behind it, but the KFIZ Today publication. So what do you What do you remember about KFIZ today? Roughly, when was that? How long were you in charge of being the paper boy, if you will?
It was called Fond du Lac today, by
Fond
the
du
way.
Lac today. Fond du Lac
Fond
today.
du Lac, and I still have every episode in a box, or every edition in a box in my storage area here. So I was working part-time. I mentioned I started when I was a sophomore in college. So I was doing more and more stuff, filling in, doing whatever was asked of me by Randy. Number one, I owe so much to my career to Randy Hopper, allowing me to do so many different things. And so then what happened was I was getting close to graduation. And so one of the things we were talking about was, at that point, the newspaper in Fond du Lac was it still is the Fond du Lac Reporter, but it was an afternoon paper. I don't know where it's at now these days, but so people wouldn't get their news till like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so it was me and Stan Stricker. And I'm not sure I think Jeff McAndrew was there at the time. I can't remember if Jeff was there, if it was Stan, but the news department guys were like, we got to find a way to get our news out in the morning. So we came up with this concept of a legal size sheet of paper that at night Stan would fax me the news that would be on in the morning. And I would type it with so many typos, it was ridiculous, where AC Hopper at one point had to start spell checking me because it was so bad. I was a young kid. And you sold ads across the side and had news and sports. And then on the back side, I had stuff like the secret word of the day with Boda's Family Restaurant. And I would get up and go to the graphic center in Fond du Lac. And they trusted a young kid with a key to this building with hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment to be there by myself. So I'd write this thing. I'd bring my 2 copies each side. I would print it. I would bag them, and I would deliver them. I think we were up to like 40 some locations in Fond du Lac. So I drive around the town, and whether it be like Georgetown Cleaners or Boda's restaurants, other restaurants, gas stations, these are just put out on the counters or in their waiting areas at dentist's office, and people would kind of look at them and read them. And it was a fun time because I was kind of my own little boss, and I was done at like noon every day, and start the next one up at night, and only got pulled over maybe 4 or 5 times running stop signs at 3 in the morning trying to get these things delivered, until I got to know all the third shift police officers in Fond du Lac. And then they kind of knew where I was and I knew where they hid. So if I had time, I'd go and I'd stop and talk to them, like hiding behind the library, or they'd be out over by Ledgeview Lanes. I'd stop and shoot the bull at those guys, and then they stopped bothering me once they realized just some guy trying to earn a living. That lasted probably until I left, and I think a few years, probably 2016, 17. And when did Fond du Lac today go away? I don't even remember.
I couldn't tell you either, but definitely was unique, served a great purpose. And yeah, you mentioned, so then you were gone for a few years, still in the company, but doing sports and whatnot over in Sheboygan. And then when I decided to leave and make the move up to Green Bay in 2005,
yeah,
you returned to KFIZ, took over as program director for me, and held that until you left. You said, what, in 2016? So what are some of your memories of being the PD over that decade plus?
So many memories. I'm going to go back just a little bit, if I will. Yeah. I got hired I remember Randy still coming to me one day when I was working part-time. This was probably like February of 1997. I was graduating in May, and he's like, hey, I'd like to sit down with you about a future role in our company. And I was like, wow, I was so excited about it. And he created a position for me. I was Margaret Larson, now Margaret Correnti's assistant sales manager. Basically, it was my job to find all of her sales reports and keep her office clean. And then basically I did whatever I needed to do around the company. So if you need me to go to a remote, if you need me to go do something with the FM guys, or I have pictures of me doing strip honking and things like that for the FM show. I was young. I do whatever they wanted me to do. And so then we started.
Didn't you, it was at a time when, didn't you like go into a kiddie pool full of ice and there was a big uproar over that? Or am I thinking of something else or something?
I think that might've been somebody else.
Okay. Sorry.
But I did, I found some pictures. There's a lot of stuff going on, but so I did that. And like, you're right. Then we ended up purchasing WMBE, which was in Chilton, and it was a classic country station. And so I kind of was overseeing that. And then we flipped it to ESPN in 2001. And so then I kind of was involved with that. And then in 2004, we purchased a couple of stations in Sheboygan, and we launched an ESPN affiliate over there. And I convinced Randy that it if we wanted to make it work right, I needed to go over there to be local, because Bob Hoffmaster and Chuck Freeman did a show. So I went to Sheboygan for a year in 2004 and got that rolling over there. And had a great time in Sheboygan. I love the city of Sheboygan. Got in a softball team, Denny's Bar, a bunch of misfits that ended up winning the league championship and going undefeated. A bunch of guys that never played sports in high school won the league, went unbeaten, beat all these teams of athletics and these athletes, and it was great. But yeah, then you left, and then Randy's like, "Wade, it's time to come home." So after my year in Sheboygan, for like 6 months, I maybe commuted back and forth just because I had a lease, and then I moved back to Fond du Lac and ended up being PD. And then I can't remember when Jerry left. I was kind of managing the company, and then Jerry St. John, I know he was a judge. So then I ended up hosting the morning show and kind of taking the reins because Chuck had moved up the Fox Valley as well. So I ended up taking over the morning show and doing all the play-by-play. And I mean, some of the greatest memories of my life are hosting the Breakfast Club. And I just was listening to I had my kids cut liners here in the last 10 years of that played during my time, but just interacting with the community, and man, just trying to go to every community event. And I love Fond du Lac and will always love Fond du Lac, and doing whatever I could in that 6 till 9:30 time frame to make Fond du Lac a better place every day, talking to whether it be people from the Humane Society, Sheriff O'Leary, or Fire Chief O'Leary. When he came in, I could just call him whenever. Talking to Phil Moses, Rockin' Bob, people, just talking to community members is what I remember most about that, and just being a part of the community and trying to make a difference.
Yeah, that certainly was the station's, trademark anchor show, right? The morning show, and not only the stations, but like you said, the community. I mean, a large portion of the population every morning, right, just flipped on 1450 because that was the source. You were finding out what was going on in the community. So yeah, to have that opportunity, like you said, to take over for a legend like Jerry, and really put your own stamp on that show. Wow, what a tremendous experience for you professionally.
Well, it was. I was young. I grew up on the. I said I grew up as the station went along, and I think my style changed a little bit. But one thing was for sure, you always had to play the Good Morning song at 6:40. Otherwise, you get the phone calls from everybody. I took the Good Morning. They still play the Good Morning song at KFIZ. Do you know?
I believe yes.
Because I took it off the air for like a month because and I just said I lost it, and I just was trying to see what the reaction would be, and I got hammered. And then one day I come in here and I'm like, "Hey, I found the Good Morning song. It was in some file, some digital file on the prod computer," and put it back, and it's still there to this day.
Wow, how about that? So what have you been up to? Well, first of all, any other thoughts on KFIZ? Otherwise, what have you been up to since leaving?
I'll just say before I talk about what I'm up to now, just my memory, like I said, my memories of KFIZ are the best memories of my life professionally. I mean, it was one of those things. It was one of those things where I thought I was going to be there forever. We're celebrating the 100th anniversary. I had plans for the 100th anniversary. We were going to give away $100 a day, every day in 2022. But then I left, and I was like, okay, we're going to get some banks involved in here. We're going to give away, all this money. It's going to be great. We're just going to, relive the memories. We're going to talk to everybody. And I thought I'd be like Joe Gazer, who wasn't Joe at like 25th and the 75th anniversary. So there's memories like that. And, the late 90s also, I think were just, sometimes we call them like the glory years, because the late 90s, we had a marketing team, a sales team, and an on-air team that sometimes they don't get along very well. But like the late 90s, probably, early 2000s, it was absolutely the best atmosphere to work in. I mean, the promotions we did Survivor at the mall, where we conned listeners to live in a car for as long as it took to get rid of them all. We did things like the traffic jams at the mall, where we had to give away a car, or just crazy promotions that we did. I mean, those are times where you can't not smile. Sean, you were a young kid at that time too, involved in all that stuff. And those are awesome days. And then, as time went on, the stations evolved a little bit, but I cherished every moment that I was at in Fond du Lac. And I ended up leaving in 2016 because my wife had a great opportunity over here in Beaver Dam. She had been a associate principal for 2 years at the high school, and she got hired for the head principal job. And to be a head principal, you really have to be in the community. So we kind of had to make a decision because I thoroughly believe to do what has to be done at a station like KFIZ, you can't commute from an hour away because you have to be at events that are around town. You have to be able to stop at the festival that's downtown and be able to know what's going on in the farmers market, know what's going on, with the local high schools, and know what's going on even at the bars, just talking to people. And so one of the hardest decisions I ever had to make, and I remember to this day, Randy Hopper was on the phone, and my wife, it was going to be in the newspaper the next day that my wife got this job in Sheboygan or in Beaver Dam, and it was going to say that we were moving to Beaver Dam because of this thing, because my wife got to look at the story before it printed. So I'm like, okay, I have to tell him today. So I remember he was talking on the phone, and I walked in and I sat down and I just said, Randy, just want you to know and I was crying at the time. I'm not going to, that my wife, tomorrow in the newspaper, it's going to come out that my wife has got a job in Beaver Dam and that we were moving to Beaver Dam. He's like, oh, okay. And then I said, that also means that I probably have to resign my position here. I just remember Randy sitting back in his chair, and we were talking, and I was, like I said, I was crying, I'm not gonna lie. And then he's like, okay. And then, so and then he was like, okay, well, when are you leaving? Because I think he thought I was going to give him 2 weeks, and it was pretty ingrained there. I'd been there a long time. So I said, no, I'll stay here as long. This is like April. And I said, I'll stay here as long as we need to stay here to find my replacement. So that's what we did. We interviewed a lot of people, found Spencer Wagon, who, did a nice job, another UW Oshkosh guy. And then July 21st of 2016, was my last day on the job. And at that point, I was going to be a stay-at-home dad because I had 3 kids in a year. I had Julia, my firstborn, January 3rd of 2009. And then my twins, Claire and Olivia, were born on January 2nd of 2010. So my daughter's first birthday was spent in the hospital with twins. And that was quite the undertaking, to do this. So I'm like, okay, my wife's going to have a job where she's going to be working crazy hours. She kind of knew that I worked crazy hours for a long time. Now it's my turn to step back. So we moved to Beaver Dam, and WBEV, I remember there's American Legion tournament where they had a bunch of guys that couldn't do it. So the PD at the time called me and said, hey, can you do this game for us? I'm like, okay. So I did one game, and that was kind of it. And I was like, okay, it's not going to take all that much time. And I really didn't do anything except for clean the house and watch the Renegade on TV with Lorenzo Lamas, I think it was, and did that. And then in September, Jason Bartelt from Marian University called me and said, hey, we have a video stream, Marian University television. Can you do the games? So I started doing that because it was like nighttime and a few nights a week, so I could still be home, take care of the kids and do all that. So I did that for a couple of years exclusively, and then phones started ringing. People started calling about, hey, can you do this game? For different radio stations and different types of TV things across the state. So did that, and the local station here, WBEV, started working, asking me to fill in. Oh, you used to host a morning show. Can you fill in when our morning show guys call? And so I started filling in there. Hey, can you do this prep show on Saturday morning? Oh, sure. Start doing it. Next thing you know, I'm like there every day. And then they came to me in the fall of 2020 and said, we have a guy that's been here since forever. He's retiring. Would you consider coming back full time and doing the morning show? And I, thought about my family and stuff, and my kids were old enough now where they could be at home and get themselves to school by themselves. And so I accepted. And so I've been hosting the WBEV morning show, which is 1430 on the dial. By the time you actually are hearing this, it's just flipped now. It's 95.3 WBEV powered by Daily Dodge. So it's on the FM now. So we just did that, and our 1430 signal is now an ESPN radio affiliate. But yeah, so I've been doing that, having a great time, because radio is in your blood. Once it's in, Sean, it, even much as you're not in it anymore, you always are. And getting to broadcast some high school games again, still working for Marian University. So it gets kind of dicey in the winter, in the fall, because I basically am working 2 full-time jobs, but I'm enjoying my time in radio and enjoying my time here at Good Karma Brands in Beaver Dam. But again, so many great memories of Fond du Lac. I mean, there are so many stories on and off that I could talk to you for 3 hours about different things. And that's one of the things I totally regret is I wish, and I thought about this like sometime in the 90s, write one paragraph about what happened every day at KFIZ. And I kicked one of my, Terry Stake, who's my mentor, did that. He wrote a book. but looking at the beams, it's called, on his wrestling career, broadcasting and such. And I wish I would have done that, because there were so many great times and great stories. I mean, I don't know how, what statute of limitations are cut, Sean, but there are so many stories we could tell after hours that we were in the office, right? Back in like the late 90s and early 2000s.
That might have to be another series, another podcast, KFIZ off air, 100 years of shenanigans.
No, exactly. But I can't say enough again how much pride I take in KFIZ, because it's an 100-year-old, it's a heritage radio station that has made such an impact on, I'm going to say, millions of people's lives in those 100 years. I mean, it is the place where people in Fond du Lac would turn to for news and information. Legends like Joe Gazer, Ron Harvey, John Buckland, that Seal Fairbanks, I think, was on the wall in the back. I don't think Seal wasn't around when I was there, but just the fact that I was able to be there for 22 years of that 100, I'll always take pride in that. I'm always going to love, what KFIZ is and what it means. And again, I thank Randy Hopper for, taking a chance on some young kid just out of school, and then, letting him kind of go wild and do whatever we needed to do.